Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Ali Ingersoll. Over the last few years, firearm injuries were the leading cause of death among children and teens over the age of 1. This is according to CDC data. There's bipartisan support for a solution, though, safer gun storage. This is the topic for our latest WRAL documentary. The documentary's reporter and producer, Cristin Severance, joins me today to talk about her reporting. Thanks so much, Cristin, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So this is a really important story to share, and thank you so much for doing it. Why did you choose this topic for this documentary, and what made you want to look into this?
You know, Ali, we just kept seeing all of these stories with really young shooting victims in North Carolina.
Right now at 6, a 6-month-old baby is at the UNC Medical Center after being shot.
We are continuing to stay on top of a heartbreaking story out of Cumberland County where a 5-month-old has died.
A 3-year-old boy accidentally shot and killed himself last night.
3 years old. And tragically, the little boy died. And this isn't a one-off. You know, the case we profile extensively in our documentary, the Genesis Dockery story, she was 8 years old when she was shot at her babysitter's house. She died 2 days later. And this happened over the summer in Fayetteville.
Time and time again, I feel like we're hearing about these stories. What is the research telling us? Are these deaths becoming more common, not only nationwide, but also here in North Carolina?
The research shows it is happening more. This stat I'm about to share is really the reason I pitched this documentary. Kids in North Carolina have a 51% greater chance of dying from a gun than the national average. And we spent a lot of time talking with experts in our documentary and asking them why. Why is this happening more? And really, there are a lot of guns in North Carolina, and a lot of them are not safely stored. I mean, there are at least 1.7 million homeowners who have guns in our state, and 50% of those homeowners said they have guns that are not safely stored. That's a lot. That's a big number.
Wow, that is a lot. Because this is happening far too often, there were a number of voices in the documentary that we heard from, the people that you talked to, including, as you just mentioned, Genesis Dockery's family. So tell us about Genesis. What's her story? What exactly happened to her?
Oh, it really is. It's so sad, but this all happened in July. Fawn Dockery and Kimberly Dockery, they live in Fayetteville. They have 2 daughters, 8-year-old Genesis, 5-year-old Amara. It was just a normal day in July. Fawn was dropping his 2 daughters off at their babysitter's house. He was headed to work. This was a trusted babysitter. They loved going there. He had never been told by either daughter that there was ever an issue or problem there. Well, then he gets a frantic call from the babysitter that 8-year-old Genesis, his daughter, had been shot. And sadly, she died 2 days later in the hospital. And, you know, he later learned that his babysitter's 11-year-old son had stolen a gun from his grandfather's house and brought it home. And there are a lot of details surrounding how the 11-year-old got the gun, why he stole the gun. And we get into all of that in our documentary called Unsafe. But I will tell you, the 11-year-old was eventually charged with larceny of a firearm and manslaughter, and he entered the juvenile equivalent of a guilty plea. His mother, you know, the babysitter, and his grandfather were never charged. And again, that's something we talk a lot about in our film. And Fawn, the father, he has very strong feelings about this, of course.
That is a parent's nightmare, right? Their child.
Yes.
You're a parent. I'm sure that is something that you really are concerned about. Was it difficult to get the Dockerys to talk with you, or is this something that they're trying to discuss more often so other families don't experience the same kind of loss?
You know, they want to talk. You know, sadly, this has become their life's mission to really talk about what happened, to talk about Genesis, and, you know, to get people to realize this can happen to you. And really, at the end of the day, they want people to safely store their guns. I mean, Fawn Dockery says, you know, Genesis Dockery is the reason for safe storage laws. If that gun was properly stored, he says very plainly they would not be in this position today. And he also is a gun owner. You know, he sits there and says, I am not anti-gun. He has firearms in his home. They're properly stored. They're in a safe. And, he's always been passionate about this. And unfortunately, now, he says there's nothing else that he can do but try to make sure that this doesn't happen to any other family.
We're going to talk more about that solution and safe storage after this break. Welcome back. So we've covered how prevalent this problem is becoming, sadly, and that's only one part of the documentary, though, right, Cristin? The other part focuses on solutions, which I think is so important that we talk about. So what exactly are the experts saying?
A lot of times covering guns, it is overwhelming because, there are so many different facets to this issue. And there are so many, different solutions. Some believe these solutions work, others aren't so sure. But there is a huge push right now for safe storage, using a gun lock, using a gun safe, storing your weapons and bullets separately. And there is research that shows it works. It really can work. I think many parents, think, well, I have a gun, my child doesn't know where it's kept. Well, according to the CDC, 30% of high school kids said that they could get and be ready to fire a loaded gun in less than an hour without an adult's permission. Without an adult's permission. So I think many people think their child doesn't know where their gun is, but that is just not the case.
Yeah, wow. That's really a shocking statistic you have there. So guns are such a divisive issue, and you sort of touched on this briefly earlier. Is that still true when it comes to safe storage? Are there two different sides to it, or is it kind of something that maybe brings everyone together, safe storage?
I went into this documentary thinking that this issue would be as divisive as many of the other issues surrounding guns. And anytime you talk about laws or policies, you will get pushback. But there really is this bipartisan support when it comes to safe storage. And not just lawmakers, but North Carolinians in general. All of the polls show that people agree with safe storage. There's this group, the NC Child Fatality Task Force. They've been pushing for a statewide safe storage initiative for years now. And basically what that means, it's a big campaign focused on what safe storage is, and then they would actually give out gun locks and safes for free. Well, it passed. It passed last year, which was a big win. They've been trying for years to get something going, but lawmakers did not fund the plan. So, a big win there, but also work left to do. The Department of Public Safety ended up finding federal dollars to launch NC Safe. So it is a campaign happening right now. They've given out tens of thousands of gun locks to health departments where people can go and get them for free. And they're really they're pushing for lawmakers to fund this plan in 2024. They're hoping for a few $1 million to really, keep the messaging out there, to buy the guns, buy the gun locks, buy safes, but also keep this message out there that people need to know about safe storage.
Yeah, and then when you hear stories like Genesis Dockery's and her parents talking about this, I guess that adds to it, right? And maybe this documentary can make some difference.
And that's really why, the Dockerys share their story. They really are hoping to get through to people.
So you talked about the number earlier, 1.7 million households in North Carolina with a gun. But there isn't really a database that tracks how many guns are in our state. And we do know from FBI information that North Carolina has conducted more than 126,000 firearm background checks so far this year in 2024, and more than 730,000 last year. So a lot of people have guns here in our state. And that means that a lot of parents are having to have a discussion related to gun safety. You and I have had this discussion. I've talked about this with a number of my friends who have kids as well. So what do you hear from families about initiating those conversations and the importance of them?
Ali, I think that is my takeaway. That is what I am taking away from producing this documentary and from spending months on this topic. People have guns. The guns are not going away. It is their right to have them. So we need to normalize this conversation. When your kids are going to a play date, you need to ask, what is the gun situation at your house? Do you have firearms? How are they stored? Where are they stored? I mean, play dates, any sort of childcare situation, a babysitter's house, neighbors. I mean, I've started asking my neighbors and my friends. And, you know, if you're not used to doing it, you know, if you didn't grow up with guns and you're not used to talking about it, it may be a little uncomfortable at first, but I'm telling you from experience, after you have that first conversation and you normalize it, I mean, people, you know, they want to talk about it and they will talk about it. And I found that if people don't want to give you that answer, then maybe you don't want to have your kids over there in the first place. And so I think that's really what I've learned. We need to be talking about this. We need to make it just normal, part of parenting.
And a lot of the research, as you talked about, has shown that conversation and safe storage really can save lives.
Yes, there is a statistic in our documentary from the NC Child Fatality Task Force that safe storage could bring down, 32% of these shootings of kids. It could bring those numbers down by 32%, and that includes accidental shootings, homicides, and suicides. That's a big number. One death is too many, right? One. Mm-hmm. But when you look at some of these numbers, and Ali, you helped me with some of this data, since 2018 in our state, 521 young people under 18 have died, from guns. And safe storage, according to all of the research, will save lives.
Well, thank you so much, Cristin, for joining me and for doing this and shining a light on this issue. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download. If you listen to this podcast on WRAL.com or the WRAL News app, you can find it in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Follow the show so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening.